The August 24th, 2024 Zack Sabre Jr. vs. Hechicero match was a huge step up from their previous matches. They once again did a match that was suited for the crowd they were wrestling for. Since this RevPro match took place in London, it was more of a classic British-style technical match, albeit without the tumbling that would have made it play better for a 21st century audience. As with their CMLL match on June 22, 2024 in Mexico, this was a style of technical match that, albeit rare in the present day, the crowd could relate to and was consistently enthralled by. These were two very different matches, and I suppose if you really love the loose lucha libre submission style, you could prefer their CMLL match, but for me this World of Sport style match was an improvement in literally every way. They lost all the cooperative mat work where they seemed to be posing one another, and did much more elongated back and forth grappling segments where it was a point of pride not to take a rope break. This was slower and less flashy than Sabre's usual submission work, and a lot more painful looking than Hechicero's usual stuff, in part because both are normally wrestling opponents who don't really know what they are doing on the mat, and, at least in story, are actively trying to avoid being on the mat as much as they can get away with. Sabre and Hechicero were, of course, actually engaging one another on the ground, and while that took some of the speed and flash out of their submission work because they didn't have to counter another style in order to do theirs, it added a lot of positive aspects by making this feel like a consistent struggle where they were actually working against each other's goals rather than mostly assisting one another and cosplaying at doing some unbelievable pro wrestling stuff. These technician versus technician matches involving Sabre, Hechicero, and Bryan Danielson stand out a lot more these days because we are to the point where most wrestling is just one person standing around watching their opponent strike them, or run and jump at them, and then they either immediately switch roles or lay around taking a break while the opponent walks in a circle playing to the crowd. In these Sabre matches, there's instead actually something resembling the resistance that was once part of pro wrestling. They keep working for a new hold or adjusting the one they have, rather than being allowed to apply a submission and sitting in it until the opponent makes their phony crawl to the ropes, then comes back with some slam or flying move on the restart. Zack vs. Hechicero was a battle for the marginal to big gains that are routinely just surrendered because the art of working the holds has largely been eliminated from modern wrestling. Even this wasn't so much about moving to maintain the current hold, but rather to get the opponent in an ever more compromising position that would be harder for them to twist or turn out of. Either way, wrestling is much more interesting when defense is a real part of the equation, and it feels like there are some actual stakes to not allowing the opponent to keep you on the defensive. Wrestling is also a lot better when it feels like something important could happen most of the time. The WWE has always pushed for a style with very tight and repetitive movesets so the crowd knows when to react, and that may be good for getting a handful of big pops, but that also means the crowd knows when not to react, and the problem for anyone who isn't super over is that's the other 95% of the match. Even if the crowd happens to be really hot, that concept results in the bulk of the match feeling pretty empty, because we know this action is meaningless entertainment at best, and pure filler at worst, with only the few very prescribed finishers, that are generally also very telegraphed to maximize that big pop, being important if the match is going to end without shenanigans. Sabre and Hechicero were trying to constantly outmaneuver each other, rather than telegraphing their finisher and either hitting it now or having it avoided until later on. The majority of the grappling they displayed tonight wouldn't be utilized against a typical opponent because it evolved out of more technical wrestling, rather than as an answer to the opponent running around. Under these parameters, the most important thing was not to allow their body to be trapped or controlled any more than it already was. And that resulted in a lot fuller match, where most of what they were doing seemed to have some sort of purpose. Rather than simply doing moves for the sake of it, their movements were at least a means to an attempt at an end. A match like Sabre vs. Hechicero is exciting precisely because the audience doesn't know what to expect. They just keep moving with the goal of controlling their opponent better, but that could come in the form of a more elaborate submission hold where there were less loose body parts that the opponent could move freely. It could also come in the form of a flash pin because the shoulders of one, if not both fighters, were on or near the mat most of the time. Hechicero may never have done a technical match in the British style before, but even though he was out of his element so to speak because this slower, grittier, nastier technical stuff isn't his normal brand of grappling, it was largely due to him that we got to see a coarser style of mat work than we normally see from Zack. Hechicero was really good here, giving a much more plausible performance than in their past matches. The fact that he was able to step it up considerably was one of the reasons this match was easily their best together, with his performance finally being much closer to Zack's level. This match was definitely one of the best examples of a modern match that didn't fall into most of the pitfalls of modern wrestling. It wasn't the usual cooperative cliche where they stand around watching the opponent do something to them, then lay around putting it over while the opponent plays to the crowd. They weren't just going with anything the opponent attempted, and they weren't just piecing the match together by checking off the boxes of what a good match is supposed to include. This was active technical wrestling where they kept adjusting and countering. There were submission holds throughout, so it was more interesting as a consistent threat than the usual stuff where someone goes from standing to their one signature submission. I thought the best part of the match was the opening 7 minutes when it was just mat work. I liked the incorporation of strikes on the mat to help open up submissions, or perhaps bait the opponent into a mistake, but their one strike exchange was box checking rather than advancing a match that was showcasing what makes them unique. After this, someone would put together a little run of strikes in transition if they were going to bother hitting each other at all. One of the hurdles they tried hard to clear was that everyone knew Sabre was going to win this time. He had already lost in Hechicero's homeland 2 months earlier, and that obviously wasn't going to happen again in Sabre's triumphant UK return. After defeating the goofball who walks around flashing his teeth after most uneventful things he does, to become the first British wrestler to ever win the G1 Climax. After the lengthy parody segment at the outset, Sabre was on the defensive much of the final 2/3 of the match to make Hechicero credible. Hechicero winning their previous match allowed him to be cocky and arrogant in dominating Sabre. Hechicero was able to connect with this crowd because he didn't have MJF undermining him at every turn. While the fans were obviously for Zack, Hechicero was certainly applauded and taken seriously as both a talent and a threat. Hechicero worked the ribs in a more interesting manner than Sabre's opponents normally do, and Sabre eventually concedes to taking a rope escape, which felt like a well-earned feather in Hechicero's cap. They ultimately succeeded in making it feel like Hechicero was the favorite here, with Zack pulling off big counters to stay in the match, but being unable to capitalize on them because his ribs slowed down his comeback attempts. There weren't many near finishes per se, and it didn't have a big escalation or really hit a higher gear, but it was still an intense and dramatic match because they were able to make most of what they did have some relevancy and tell a broader story of both guys being a twist or turn away from a tap out or a flash pin. For the most part, they were able to work the high spots into the match in an interesting manner that didn't make it feel like they were just forcing things or now randomly switching to doing a different type of match. There were a few nice lucha spots where they figured out how to do something a bit flashier without diverting from their primary style. For instance, Zack used it to Harris as a setup move for his neck screw. When he went for the Harris again, Hechicero was ready for it, but Zack countered Hechicero's counter by going into an armbar. Zack would hit a big move to come back, such as the Tornado DDT or Zack Driver, but be unable to capitalize due to the rib injury. Still, there were points where the action actually slowed down due to the few strikes and suplexes they threw in, instead of them helping to pick things up. This sounds weird, but because they were no longer locked up, we got bits of the usual stick where the heel does one thing then taunts the face while the face lays around selling. There weren't too many big risks here, and when Hechicero tried to boomerang off the middle rope, Zack caught him and pretzeled him for the submission win. While this wasn't as amazing as the February 11th, 2024 New Japan Sabre vs. Bryan Danielson match of the year, or even their October 1st, 2023 AEW match, right now this is my second favorite men's match of 2024. I'm not sure what to rate this match because I don't think it's an amazing example of British-style wrestling overall, but this felt like a much different match than I'm always seeing these days in a lot of positive ways. It's consistently intense grappling in a time when almost all wrestling follows the annoying stop and start pattern, because they don't do much these days beyond high spots and selling. It feels like a 4-star match overall that one could easily justify bumping to 4.25 stars if they were rating on a 2020s curve.